On February 13, 2013, the Los Angeles Police Department made a decision that would inadvertently create one of the most viral and analyzed pieces of footage in true crime history. They released surveillance camera video from the Cecil Hotel showing a young woman behaving strangely in an elevator. The woman was 21-year-old Elisa Lam, a Canadian tourist who had vanished nearly 2 weeks earlier. The 4-minute clip would be viewed millions of times, spawning countless theories, investigations, and debates that continue to this day. In the grainy footage, Elisa enters the elevator wearing a red hoodie, black shorts, and sandals. She presses multiple buttons on the panel, then peers cautiously into the hallway outside, looking left and right as if checking for someone. She backs into the corner of the elevator, appearing to hide. The elevator doors remain open, refusing to close despite her button presses. She steps out, then back in, pressing more buttons. Then she moves into the hallway, just outside the camera's view, where she makes strange hand movements and gestures as if communicating with someone invisible. Finally, she walks away, and after a long delay, the elevator doors close. The video was unsettling, mysterious, and raised far more questions than it answered. Who was she hiding from? Who was she talking to? Why wouldn't the elevator move? 6 days after the police released this footage, Elisa Lam's body was discovered in one of the water tanks on the roof of the Cecil Hotel. She had been dead for approximately 19 days. The guests at the hotel had been drinking, bathing in, and brushing their teeth with water that had contained her decomposing remains. This is the story of what happened to Elisa Lam, a young woman with her whole life ahead of her, who traveled to Los Angeles seeking adventure and ended up at one of the most notorious hotels in America. It is a story that touches on mental health, the dark history of a landmark building, the power and pitfalls of internet investigation, and ultimately, a tragic loss that devastated a family and captivated the world. The Cecil Hotel, born in luxury, descended into darkness. To understand the Elisa Lam case, one must first understand the Cecil Hotel itself. This building has a history so dark, so filled with tragedy and violence, that some have called it cursed. Others simply point to its location and the socio-economic factors that transformed a once grand establishment into a haven for crime and despair. The Cecil Hotel opened its doors on December 20th, 1924, at the height of the Roaring Twenties. Built by 3 hoteliers named William Banks Hanner, Charles L. Dix, and Robert H. Shops, the structure was designed by architect Loy Lester Smith in the Beaux-Arts style, with some describing it as Art Deco. The building cost approximately $1.5 million to construct, an enormous sum for the era. The investors poured about $2.5 million total into the enterprise, envisioning a destination for business travelers and tourists visiting Los Angeles. The hotel boasted 700 rooms spread across 14 floors. The lobby was opulent, featuring marble floors, stained glass windows, potted palms, and alabaster statuary. It was meant to be a symbol of sophistication and refinement, a place where the social elite and international businessmen would stay while conducting their affairs in the growing metropolis of Los Angeles. For a brief period, the Cecil Hotel fulfilled this vision, flourishing as a fashionable destination throughout the 1930s and 1940s. However, the Great Depression struck just 5 years after the hotel opened, and Los Angeles was not spared from its devastating economic impact. While the Cecil Hotel had initially attracted a wealthy clientele, the financial collapse of the late 1920s changed everything. The area around the hotel began to decline. What had been a thriving downtown district slowly transformed into what would become known as Skid Row, one of the largest populations of homeless individuals in the United States. By the 1950s and beyond, the Cecil Hotel's fortunes had completely reversed. The surrounding neighborhood had become increasingly populated with transients, and the hotel's reputation shifted from luxurious to dangerous. The rooms that once housed business executives and tourists now provided cheap accommodation for those on the margins of society. Rooms could be rented for as little as $14 per night by the 1980s, making the Cecil an affordable option for people with very limited means. The first recorded death at the Cecil Hotel occurred in 1931, just over 2 years after its grand opening. A man died by suicide in his room. Tragically, this would be far from the last such incident. Over the decades, the Cecil Hotel became synonymous with death, violence, and mysterious disappearances. The exact number of deaths at the hotel is difficult to determine with certainty, but estimates suggest at least 16 different murders, suicides, and unexplained deaths have occurred within its walls or in its immediate vicinity. In the late 1960s, a retired woman living in one of the residential rooms at the Cecil was found dead in her room. She had been raped, stabbed, and beaten. Her name was Goldie Osgood, and she was a local woman known around the area as Pigeon Goldie. Her murder remains unsolved to this day. A suspect was found walking nearby with blood-stained clothing, but he was later cleared, and the killer was never brought to justice. One particularly horrific incident occurred in 1964 when a woman named Pauline Otten jumped from one of the upper floors of the hotel. Her body struck and killed a pedestrian walking below, George Giannini, resulting in 2 deaths from a single tragic act. This macabre detail only added to the hotel's growing reputation as a place where death seemed to lurk around every corner. The Cecil Hotel also has connections to one of Los Angeles's most infamous, unsolved murders. Elizabeth Short, who would become known as the Black Dahlia after her brutal murder in 1947, was reportedly seen at the Cecil Hotel shortly before her death. While this connection has been debated, and some sources claim there is no solid evidence she stayed there, the association has persisted in the hotel's dark lore. Her murder, which involved her body being cut in half and mutilated, shocked the nation and has never been solved despite numerous suspects over the years. Perhaps the most notorious aspect of the Cecil Hotel's history involves its connection to not one, but 2 serial killers. This fact alone sets the hotel apart as a truly unique location in American criminal history. The first serial killer associated with the Cecil was Richard Ramirez, known as the Night Stalker. Between 1984 and 1985, Ramirez terrorized Southern California with a series of brutal home invasions, murders, sexual assaults, and burglaries. His victims were chosen seemingly at random, and he killed them in various horrific ways, often after sexually assaulting them. He was a Satanist who seemed to take pleasure in the sadistic nature of his crimes. During his active killing period, Ramirez stayed at the Cecil Hotel on the 14th floor, paying just $14 per night for his room. Former residents of the hotel from that era described it as a lawless place where serial killers felt comfortable calling it home. One resident, Kenneth Givens, recalled in interviews that the higher floors of the Cecil were particularly dangerous in the 1980s. He stated that people would sometimes rob guests, beat them, and throw them out windows. He warned, "If you didn't watch yourself, you might come flying out of there with no wings." Ramirez would return to the hotel after committing his horrific crimes, often covered in blood. According to some accounts, he would use the back alley entrance to the hotel, where he would strip off his blood-soaked clothing and throw it in the dumpsters behind the building. The lax security and general chaos of the hotel meant that his nocturnal comings and goings raised no alarms. In August 1985, Ramirez was finally captured after a group of Los Angeles residents spotted him and prevented him from escaping until police arrived. He was convicted in 1989 of 13 murders, 5 attempted murders, 11 sexual assaults, and 14 burglaries. He was sentenced to death, but ultimately died of cancer in 2013 while still on death row. The second serial killer to stay at the Cecil Hotel was Johann Jack Unterweger, an Austrian journalist who arrived in Los Angeles in 1991. Unterweger's story is particularly disturbing because of the circumstances that brought him to America. He had been convicted of murdering a young woman in Austria in 1974, but was released in 1990 after a public campaign argued for his freedom. Once released, he became a journalist and was assigned by an Austrian magazine to write about crime and prostitution in Los Angeles. It is believed that Unterweger chose the Cecil Hotel specifically because of its connection to Richard Ramirez, selecting it as a dark homage to the earlier killer. During his 5-week stay in Los Angeles, Unterweger even participated in ride-alongs with the LAPD Vice Squad, ostensibly for his reporting work. These ride-alongs gave him access to the red light district and helped him identify potential victims. During his time at the Cecil, Unterweger murdered at least 3 sex workers, Shannon Exley, Irene Rodriguez, and Peggy Booth. He raped and strangled them with their own bras, using a distinctive ligature method. He managed to remove their bodies from the hotel without detection. When Austrian police later connected the strangulation deaths of these 3 Los Angeles women with a series of 6 unsolved murders back in Austria, all following the same pattern, Unterweger fled the United States. He was arrested in Miami in February 1992 and extradited to Austria. In June 1994, an Austrian court convicted him of 11 murders and sentenced him to life in prison with no chance of parole. That very night, Unterweger killed himself in his cell, using the same distinctive ligature method he had employed to murder his victims. These serial killer connections, combined with the numerous other deaths, suicides, and violent incidents, gave the Cecil Hotel a reputation that extended far beyond Los Angeles. True crime enthusiasts began referring to it as Serial Killer Central and one of LA's most haunted hotels. Some believed the building itself was cursed or evil, while others pointed to the socioeconomic factors, the location on Skid Row, and the lack of security as more rational explanations for the concentration of tragedy. In 2011, in an attempt to escape this dark reputation and attract a new clientele, the hotel was partially rebranded as Stay on Main. The rebranding created separate reception areas during the day, though the facilities remained shared and the official website continued to be the cecilhotel.com. The idea was to market the property as a trendy, budget-friendly hostel that would appeal to young international travelers and students, rather than the transient population that had dominated for decades. The building still maintained its original Cecil Hotel signage and painted advertisements on its exterior, creating a strange dual identity. Part of the hotel functioned as Stay on Main, while other sections continued to house long-term residents, many of whom were formerly homeless individuals from Skid Row. This rebranding effort was meant to bring new life to the struggling property, but it could not erase decades of tragedy. It was during this transitional period, when the hotel was trying to rebrand and attract international guests, that Elisa Lam checked in on January 28, 2013. She was exactly the type of guest the hotel hoped to attract with its Stay on Main concept, a young, budget-conscious international traveler looking for an affordable place to stay in downtown Los Angeles. The Cecil Hotel was about to become the site of yet another tragedy, one that would bring it more attention than ever before. Who was Elisa Lam? A young woman with dreams and struggles. Elisa Lam was born on April 30, 1991, in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. Her Cantonese name was Lam Ho Yi. Her family had immigrated to Canada from Hong Kong, seeking better opportunities and a new life. In British Columbia, her parents, David and Yina Lam, opened a restaurant in Burnaby, working hard to establish themselves in their new country. They were described by neighbors and acquaintances as honest, hard-working people dedicated to building a life for their family. Elisa was a bright student who attended University Hill Secondary School and later enrolled at the University of British Columbia. She was ambitious and had dreams of seeing the world, traveling, and experiencing life beyond her hometown. She was interested in fashion, loved literature, and was particularly fond of Harry Potter and The Great Gatsby. She had a creative side and enjoyed expressing herself through writing. However, beneath Elisa's outward enthusiasm for life and adventure lay a serious struggle with mental health issues. By the age of 21, she had been diagnosed with bipolar disorder and depression. These conditions had a profound impact on her life, affecting her ability to maintain her studies and pursue her goals consistently. Bipolar disorder, previously known as manic depressive illness, is a mental health condition characterized by extreme mood swings that include emotional highs, called mania or hypomania, and lows, called depression. During manic phases, individuals may experience elevated mood, increased energy, racing thoughts, decreased need for sleep, and engagement in risky behaviors. Some people experiencing severe manic episodes can also have disorganized thinking, false beliefs, and hallucinations, known as psychotic features. During depressive phases, individuals may feel hopeless, lose interest in activities, have difficulty concentrating, and in severe cases, have thoughts of suicide. Research shows that bipolar disorder typically manifests in a person's late teens to mid-20s, making Elisa's age at diagnosis quite common. Studies have also indicated that as many as 60% of bipolar patients attempt suicide at least once in their lifetime, and in untreated bipolar disorder, an alarming 1 in 5 individuals complete suicide. This sobering statistic highlights the seriousness of the condition and the importance of consistent treatment and medication. To manage her condition, Elisa had been prescribed 4 different medications: Wellbutrin, bupropion, Lamictal, lamotrigine, Seroquel, quetiapine, and Effexor, venlafaxine. Wellbutrin is an antidepressant that helps with depression symptoms. Lamictal is a mood stabilizer commonly used to prevent the extreme highs and lows of bipolar disorder. Seroquel is an antipsychotic medication that can help with both manic and depressive symptoms and can also address psychotic features. Effexor is another antidepressant that helps stabilize mood. When taken as prescribed, this combination of medications can help individuals with bipolar disorder live stable, productive lives. However, Elisa had a history of not consistently taking her medication. Her sister revealed to detectives that Elisa had experienced episodes in the past where she had stopped taking her medication, leading to severe mental health crises. During these episodes, Elisa became delusional and paranoid, believing that people were following her or trying to harm her. She had been hospitalized at least once due to one of these psychotic episodes. Elisa was open about her struggles with mental health, at least in certain spaces. She maintained a blog on the platform Tumblr called Ether Fields, where she wrote candidly about her experiences with depression and bipolar disorder. Her posts revealed the pain and isolation she felt living with these conditions. In one post, she wrote, "Apparently, I'm bipolar. A few good days followed by a week of sleeping. That is the pattern." In another, she expressed frustration with her condition. "According to some people, I have a chemical imbalance. Can I just inhabit someone else's brain?" A post from January 2012 described a relapse that had caused her to drop several classes at her university, leaving her feeling so utterly directionless and lost. Other posts revealed the toll her mental health struggles took on her daily life and self-image. She wrote about sleeping for 3 days straight, about feeling apathetic and suicidal, and about the crushing weight of depression. She described feeling like her mental illness defined her, writing about the stigma and misunderstandings she faced. Reading her blog posts now, with the knowledge of what would happen to her, is heartbreaking. They show a young woman fighting hard against her own mind, trying to maintain hope while battling forces she couldn't fully control. Despite these struggles, Elisa was determined to live her life and pursue her dreams. In early 2013, she decided to take a solo trip along the west coast of the United States. She wanted to visit Southern California, explore new cities, and experience the world beyond Vancouver. Her parents were understandably concerned about her traveling alone, given her mental health challenges. However, Elisa was insistent, and they reached a compromise. She would call them every single day to let them know she was safe. Elisa planned an ambitious itinerary. She would travel by Amtrak train and intercity buses, making stops in San Diego, Los Angeles, Santa Cruz, and San Francisco before returning home. It was meant to be an adventure, a chance to prove to herself and her family that she could be independent and capable despite her mental health challenges. She started her journey, traveling down the California coast. She visited the San Diego Zoo on January 28, 2013, and posted photos on her social media accounts showing her enjoying the experience and the California sunshine. She appeared happy and excited in these images, a young woman living out her travel dreams. On January 26, 2013, Elisa arrived in Los Angeles, the next stop on her West Coast tour. She spent a day exploring before checking into the Cecil Hotel 2 days later, on January 28th. She had made an online reservation for a 3-night stay. The hotel, marketed as Stay on Main, offered budget-friendly accommodations and was located in downtown Los Angeles, making it seem like a practical choice for a young traveler watching her expenses. What Elisa did not know, what she could not have known from an online booking site, was the dark history of the place where she had chosen to stay. She had no idea about the murders, the suicides, the serial killers, or the desperate circumstances of many of the hotel's other residents. She simply saw an affordable place to sleep while she explored Los Angeles. Elisa Lam arrived at the Cecil Hotel as a 21-year-old with dreams, struggles, hopes, and fears. She would never leave. The final days, strange behavior, and growing concerns. When Elisa checked into the Cecil Hotel on January 28, 2013, she was initially assigned to a shared hostel-style room on the 5th floor. The Stay on Main rebranding had introduced this dormitory-style accommodation, where multiple guests would share a room with bunk beds, similar to hostels popular with young travelers in Europe and other parts of the world. This arrangement kept costs low and was meant to foster a social atmosphere among young international visitors. However, Elisa's stay in the shared room was short-lived. After just 2 days, her roommates complained about her behavior, which they described as odd and disruptive. According to Amy Price, who was the manager of the Cecil Hotel and Stay on Main at the time of Elisa's disappearance, Elisa had been leaving notes for her roommates that said things like, "Go home" and "Go away." She would lock the door to the shared room and require her roommates to provide a password before allowing them to enter. This behavior understandably made her roommates uncomfortable and concerned. In response to these complaints, hotel management made the decision to move Elisa to a private room on the same floor. This move happened shortly before her disappearance. The hotel staff, accustomed to dealing with residents who exhibited unusual behavior given the building's mixed population, did not view Elisa's actions as particularly alarming at the time. Amy Price would later state that because odd behavior was unfortunately common at the Cecil, especially among some of the long-term residents struggling with mental health issues or substance abuse, Elisa's behavior did not immediately raise red flags for the staff. Elisa continued to explore Los Angeles during her stay. On January 31st, she visited the Last Bookstore, an independent bookstore in downtown Los Angeles that has become a beloved institution. Katie Orphan, the manager of the last bookstore, would later recall this encounter in interviews. She remembered Elisa as being outgoing, very lively, very friendly during her visit. Elisa was enthusiastically looking for gifts to take home to her family members, discussing what books she was considering and whether what she was purchasing would be too heavy for her to carry as she continued her travels. Orphan's account paints a picture of a young woman who, at least in that moment, seemed excited about her trip and thoughtful about her family back home. This visit to the last bookstore would be one of the last confirmed sightings of Elisa Lam by someone outside the Cecil Hotel. It is a bittersweet detail, this final glimpse of her engaged in the simple pleasure of browsing for books, still thinking about the people she loved and the gifts she would bring them. However, there were other incidents during Elisa's stay in Los Angeles that suggested her mental health may have been deteriorating. A few days before her disappearance, Elisa attended a live taping of the television show Conan, hosted by Conan O'Brien, at a studio in Burbank, California. This should have been an exciting experience, a chance to see a popular late-night talk show being filmed. Instead, it became another warning sign that something was wrong. According to reports, Elisa was escorted off the premises by security due to disruptive behavior. She had apparently written a rambling, incoherent letter and insisted that it be given to Conan O'Brien himself. Security staff deemed her behavior concerning enough that they removed her from the audience. They did not believe she posed a danger to others, but her actions were erratic enough to warrant her removal from the taping. This incident, when viewed in hindsight, suggests that Elisa was likely experiencing symptoms of her bipolar disorder, possibly entering a manic or psychotic phase. Throughout her trip, true to her promise to her parents, Elisa maintained daily contact with them. She called David and Elisa Lam every single day to check in and let them know she was safe. For parents worried about their daughter traveling alone, especially given her mental health history, these daily calls provided reassurance and connection. They could hear her voice, assess how she sounded, and maintain that vital link between them. January 31st, 2013 was supposed to be Elisa's checkout day from the Cecil Hotel. Her plan was to continue northward to Santa Cruz, the next stop on her West Coast adventure. But on that day, the daily phone call that David and Elisa Lam had come to expect did not come. They tried calling their daughter repeatedly, but she did not answer. As the hours passed with no word from Elisa, her parents' concern grew into alarm. On February 1st, 2013, when there was still no contact from their daughter, David and Elisa Lam contacted the Los Angeles Police Department to report Elisa missing. This was completely out of character for their daughter, who had been so faithful about her daily check-ins. They knew something was terribly wrong. The Lams immediately flew from Vancouver to Los Angeles to assist with the search for their daughter, joining the police investigation and holding out hope that Elisa would be found safe. The LAPD responded to the missing person report and began their investigation at the Cecil Hotel. When police searched Elisa's room, they found all of her personal belongings still there. Her wallet, her identification, her laptop, and notably her medication were all in the room. For a young woman who had been traveling and planned to continue her journey, leaving behind these essential items made no sense. Her wallet meant she had no access to money. Her ID meant she couldn't prove who she was or travel easily. Her laptop was her connection to the outside world. Most significantly, her medication bottles were found with more pills remaining than there should have been based on when they were last refilled. This physical evidence suggested that Elisa had not been taking her prescribed medications as directed. She had either been under-medicating herself or had stopped taking some of her medications altogether. For someone with bipolar disorder, discontinuing medication can trigger severe symptoms, including psychotic episodes. the police conducted an extensive search of the hotel and the surrounding area. They brought in scent-tracking dogs to help locate Elisa. The dogs were able to track Elisa's scent up to the 5th floor, where her room was located, and to a window that was connected to the fire escape. At that point, the scent trail was lost. This suggested that Elisa might have exited the building via the fire escape, though it did not definitively prove this scenario. The search also extended to the hotel's roof. Police officers and their canine units did visit the roof as part of their search. However, crucially, they did not check inside the 4 large water tanks that were located there. The tanks were cylindrical structures, each 4 feet by 8 feet in size and about 10 feet tall, propped up on concrete blocks. They held approximately 1,000 gallons of water each and provided water to the hotel's guest rooms, kitchen, and coffee shop. The tanks had heavy metal lids, and accessing them required climbing up onto the platform where they sat and then using a ladder to reach the top. At the time of the search, the police had no specific reason to believe that Elisa would be inside one of these water tanks. The tanks appeared to be secured, and it seemed unlikely that someone would or could access them. The dogs did not alert to the tanks, though this may have been because the enclosed nature of the tanks prevented scent molecules from escaping in a way the dogs could detect. The decision not to search inside the water tanks during this initial investigation would later be scrutinized, but at the time, with limited resources and no indication that the tanks were relevant, the police focused their search efforts elsewhere. With no body found, no clear evidence of where Elisa had gone, and no leads emerging from the initial investigation, the case stalled. Elisa Lam had seemingly vanished into thin air. She had not been seen leaving the hotel by staff or captured on lobby cameras exiting the building. Yet she was nowhere to be found within the Cecil Hotel itself. The LAPD needed help from the public. They decided to release surveillance footage from the hotel's security cameras, hoping that someone might recognize Elisa or have information about what happened to her. The footage they chose to release was from the hotel's elevator on the 14th floor, filmed on January 31st, 2013, the same day Elisa was last heard from. On February 13th, 2013, the Los Angeles Police Department released this elevator footage on their website, asking for the public's assistance in finding Elisa Lam. They could not have anticipated what would happen next. The elevator video, 4 minutes, that went viral. The elevator surveillance video from the Cecil Hotel is approximately 4 minutes long and shows Elisa Lam alone in the elevator. However, calling it surveillance footage somehow fails to capture the strange, unsettling nature of what the video shows. This is not simply security camera footage of someone using an elevator. It is a window into something deeply wrong, a visual record of a young woman in distress, and it raises far more questions than it answers. The video begins with Elisa entering the elevator, wearing her red hoodie, black shorts, and sandals. This outfit matches the clothing that would later be found with her body. She steps into the elevator and immediately begins pressing multiple buttons on the control panel. She presses what appears to be almost every floor button in the middle row of the panel. Among the buttons she presses is the door hold button, which prevents the elevator from moving and keeps the doors open. Whether this was intentional or accidental is unclear. After pressing the buttons, Elisa moves to the corner of the elevator, positioning herself where she would be least visible to someone looking in from the hallway. She stands in this corner, seemingly waiting for the elevator to move or the doors to close. When nothing happens, she cautiously approaches the elevator doorway and peers out into the hallway. She looks to her left, then to her right, as if checking whether someone is out there. She then backs into the elevator again, pressing herself against the wall. Her body language suggests she is trying to hide from something or someone. She returns to the doorway and peeks out again, this time more quickly, like someone checking to see if a threat is still present. the elevator doors remained stubbornly open throughout all of this. Elisa then steps fully out of the elevator and stands just outside the doorway, still within the camera's view. She moves in what some have described as a square pattern, stepping to the left, then forward, then right. She raises her hands and begins making gestures. Her hands move in front of her body, her arms go up and down, and she appears to be speaking or mouthing words. Her movements have been described variously as resembling communication, conjuring, or the gestures someone might make while explaining something to another person. The disturbing aspect of this sequence is that there appears to be no one else in the frame. No other person is visible in the hallway or near the elevator. Elisa seems to be interacting with someone or something that the camera cannot see. Or perhaps she is experiencing hallucinations and interacting with someone who is not actually there at all. She then steps back into the elevator and once again presses multiple buttons. She exits the elevator again, this time standing with her back to the camera, making more hand gestures and movements. At one point, she runs her hands through her hair in what might be a gesture of frustration or confusion. She then moves to stand directly in front of where the elevator doors should close, in the door frame itself. Throughout much of this sequence, the elevator doors never close, even though they should. In normal circumstances, if someone presses the buttons and steps back, the doors should close and the elevator should move to the selected floors. Instead, the doors remain open for an unusually long time. This malfunction, if that is what it is, adds to the eerie quality of the footage. Finally, at around the 2:30 mark of the video, Elisa steps out of the camera frame entirely, moving to the left and out of view. The elevator remains motionless with its doors open. After Elisa has been out of frame for some time, the doors finally close, and the elevator presumably begins to move. But Elisa never returns to the frame. The video ends with an empty elevator. When the LAPD released this video on February 13th, they hoped it would generate tips and leads that would help them find Elisa. What they got instead was a viral phenomenon. The video was reposted across the internet, on YouTube, on Facebook, on Twitter, and on Chinese video sharing sites. On Youku, a popular Chinese platform, the video accumulated 3 million views and 40,000 comments in its first 10 days alone. Eventually, the video would be viewed tens of millions of times across all platforms. People found the video deeply unsettling to watch. Elisa's behavior seemed impossible to explain through normal circumstances. The comment sections and online forums filled with theories, speculation, and attempts to analyze every frame of the footage. Was she running from someone? Was she hiding from a pursuer? Why were her hand gestures so strange? Why did the elevator malfunction? And perhaps, most chillingly, what happened to her after she stepped out of the frame? Body language experts weighed in on the footage, offering their interpretations of Elisa's movements and demeanor. Dr. Jack Brown, a body language specialist, analyzed the video and came to some surprising conclusions. He noted that while Elisa's behavior was certainly unusual, he saw no indication of fear in her body language. Instead, he identified signs of playfulness, sexual arousal, and anxiety, but not the terror one might expect from someone fleeing a threat. He suggested that her movements, particularly when she stood outside the elevator making hand gestures, had a fluid, slow, and deliberate quality. When she raised her arms and had her hands in her hair, he identified this as a strong and highly reliable indicator of sexual interest, suggesting she might have been thinking about someone or believed someone was present with whom she was flirting. This interpretation contradicted many of the theories that Elisa was running from a dangerous pursuer. If the body language analysis was correct, Elisa was not afraid of whoever or whatever she was interacting with. This lent support to the theory that she was experiencing a psychotic episode and hallucinating the presence of another person. perhaps someone she found attractive or interesting, rather than threatening. However, not everyone accepted the video at face value. Almost immediately, conspiracy theories began to emerge, suggesting that the video had been tampered with or edited before being released to the public. Internet sleuths pointed to several perceived anomalies in the footage. First, they noted that the timestamp in the corner of the video appeared scrambled or pixelated, making it difficult or impossible to read the exact time. Why would the police obscure the timestamp? Some theorize this was done to hide something significant about the timing of events. Second, some viewers claimed that parts of the video appeared to have been slowed down, making Elisa's movements seem stranger than they actually were. They pointed to moments where her motion seemed unnaturally sluggish. Third, and perhaps most significantly, viewers claimed that approximately 53 seconds of footage had been removed from the video. They noted what they believed to be a jump cut around the 2:57 mark, where the elevator door appears to suddenly jump or skip. They speculated that this missing minute of footage might show another person entering or leaving the elevator, or might contain other crucial information that the police wanted to hide. Fourth, some eagle-eyed viewers claimed to see what looked like a foot or shoe at the edge of the frame when Elisa exits to the left. The angle and position of this potential foot did not match where Elisa had exited, suggesting it might belong to another person. This fueled theories that someone else was in the hallway with her, someone who was edited out, or whom the camera angle mostly missed. These theories about video manipulation led to darker speculation. If the police had edited the video, what were they hiding? Was there a cover-up? Did someone at the hotel or within the LAPD know more about what happened to Elisa than they were revealing? The editing theories suggested that Elisa might not have been alone, that there could have been a pursuer or attacker that was deliberately removed from the footage. However, more prosaic explanations exist for these perceived anomalies. Security camera footage is often of poor quality, recorded at low frame rates, and compressed to save storage space. This can create artifacts that look like editing to the untrained eye. The timestamp might have been obscured by the police to protect the investigation, or simply due to standard procedures for releasing evidence to the public. The apparent slowdown of motion could be the result of the camera's low frame rate capturing movement in a way that appears sluggish when played back. The missing 53 seconds might simply be the elevator sitting motionless with Elisa out of frame, which the police edited out to save time rather than show an empty stationary elevator for nearly a minute. As for why the elevator doors did not close for so long, there is actually a logical explanation that does not require a malfunction or conspiracy. When Elisa pressed multiple buttons simultaneously, including the door hold button, she activated a feature that keeps elevator doors open for an extended period. This is a standard safety feature in elevators to allow people time to enter or exit, particularly people with mobility issues who might need extra time. The doors remained open because the elevator system was doing exactly what it was designed to do when those buttons were pressed. Once the system's timer expired and no one had entered the elevator, the doors finally closed and the elevator moved to one of the selected floors. The video's viral spread meant that Elisa Lam's case captured international attention. Chinese media, in particular, followed the story closely, given Elisa's family's origins in Hong Kong. The case resonated with young people who saw themselves in Elisa, a young woman traveling alone, trying to experience the world. The mystery of what happened to her became a global fixation. But while the world watched and theorized about the elevator video, Elisa Lam was still missing. Her parents were in Los Angeles, desperate for any information about their daughter. The police continued their investigation, but with no body and no clear leads, there was little they could do beyond hope that the viral video would generate the tip they needed. That tip, in a sense, would come, but not from anyone who had information about Elisa's whereabouts. It would come from hotel guests who began to notice that something was very wrong with the water. The discovery: horror in the water tank. As the search for Elisa Lam continued into its third week, guests at the Cecil Hotel began to complain about problems with the water. The complaints started on February 14, 2013, just one day after the elevator video was released to the public. Multiple guests reported that they were experiencing low water pressure in their rooms. The water would come out of the faucets slowly, in weak streams, rather than the normal flow. But low pressure was not the only issue. Some guests reported that the water had a strange taste. Others said it had an unusual smell. A few guests even claimed that the water coming from their taps had a dark discoloration, appearing brownish or blackish rather than clear. Some thought the water tasted funny or metallic. Incredibly, some guests continued to use this water despite these warning signs. They brushed their teeth with it, bathed in it, and even drank it, despite the fact that something was obviously wrong. Some rationalized that perhaps this was just how water tasted in Los Angeles, or that the hotel's plumbing was old and rusty. One guest would later tell reporters, "We never thought anything of it. We thought it was just the way it was here." Another guest, Michael Baugh, would later recall his horror upon learning what had actually been in the water. "It makes you feel literally physically sick, but more than that, you feel it psychologically. You think about it, and it's not good." The hotel management could not ignore these complaints. Low water pressure could indicate a leak, a burst pipe, or a problem with the building's water system. The problems needed to be investigated and resolved. On the morning of February 19, 2013, hotel maintenance worker Santiago Lopez was assigned to investigate the water issues. Lopez, who had worked at the Cecil Hotel since 2010, knew the building well. He understood that the hotel's water was supplied by 4 large cylindrical tanks located on the roof. Each tank was approximately 4 feet in diameter and 8 feet long, and held about 1,000 gallons of water. These tanks were filled from city water lines, and gravity fed the water down to all the rooms, the kitchen, and the coffee shop in the building. If guests were experiencing low pressure and odd taste, the logical place to check was the tanks themselves. Lopez took the elevator up to the 15th floor, which was the top floor of guest rooms. From there, he accessed a staircase that led up to the roof. Before opening the door to the roof, he had to turn off the alarm system. The door to the roof was equipped with an alarm that would sound if opened by someone who did not have the proper authorization or who did not deactivate it first. The alarm was intended to prevent unauthorized access to the roof. When it activated, it would be audible to the front desk and to people on the 14th and 15th floors. Lopez deactivated the alarm and stepped out onto the roof. The Los Angeles morning sun would have been bright, and from the roof of the Cecil Hotel, one can see the downtown Los Angeles skyline. But Lopez was not there for the view. He was there to check the water tanks. The 4 large tanks sat on a raised concrete platform, requiring him to climb up to reach them. Once on the platform, he would need to maneuver between the tanks and the various plumbing equipment that surrounded them. To look inside any of the tanks, he would need to climb a ladder attached to the side of each tank, bringing him to the top where the access hatches were located. Lopez climbed the ladder on the first tank he chose to inspect. When he reached the top, he noticed something immediately unusual. The hatch, which should have been closed and secured, was open. He looked down through the hatch into the tank. What Santiago Lopez saw in that moment would haunt him forever. Floating face up in the water, approximately 12 inches from the top of the tank, was the body of a woman. Her skin had the greenish bloated appearance of a body that had been submerged in water for an extended period. There was marbling on the abdomen and skin separation, clear signs of decomposition. The body was naked. Floating in the water around the body were pieces of clothing, a watch, and a room key. Lopez immediately closed the hatch and climbed back down. He contacted the authorities. Within a short time, the Los Angeles Police Department and the Los Angeles Fire Department arrived on the scene. The fire department faced a significant challenge in recovering the body. The access hatches on the water tanks were too small to accommodate firefighters and the equipment they would need to safely remove a body from inside the tank. They could not simply reach in and pull the body out. The decision was made to cut a hole in the side of the tank large enough to allow access. Firefighters used cutting tools to create an opening. They drained the water from the tank. Only then could they carefully remove the body. The entire process took several hours. When the body was examined, it became clear that this was Elisa Lam. She had been missing for 19 days. She had been in that water tank the entire time, while police searched the hotel and the surrounding area. She had been there while the elevator video went viral, and millions of people around the world speculated about her whereabouts. And most horrifyingly, she had been there while hotel guests drank, bathed in, and brushed their teeth with water from that tank. The Los Angeles County Department of Public Health immediately issued a "do not drink" order for the hotel. They needed to test the water to determine whether it was safe for consumption or whether it posed health risks to the guests who had been exposed to it. The testing would take time, and in the meantime, guests were warned not to use the tap water. The hotel relocated guests from 27 rooms to another hotel as a precaution. However, 11 rooms remained occupied. Some guests chose to stay at the Cecil Hotel despite everything. Those who remained were required to sign a waiver acknowledging that they had been informed of the health risks and that they were staying at their own risk and peril. The hotel provided bottled water to these guests. Remarkably, guests who had already paid for their rooms would not receive refunds if they chose to move out. The news of the discovery spread quickly. Media outlets across the United States and around the world reported the story. Headlines read, "Body of missing Canadian tourist found in LA hotel water tank. Hotel with corpse in water tank has notorious past." And "Guests at hotel were drinking corpse water." The story had everything that captures public attention: a young, photogenic victim, a bizarre circumstance, a location with a dark history, and disturbing details that made people's skin crawl. For David and Elisa Lam, the news was devastating. They had spent 19 days in Los Angeles, desperately hoping that their daughter would be found alive. They had held on to hope, even as that hope grew thinner with each passing day. Now they knew the worst. Their daughter was dead, and she had been so close, just on the roof of the hotel where she had been staying. If only the police had checked inside the water tanks during their initial search. If only the water problems had emerged sooner. If only so many things had been different. The discovery of Elisa's body answered the question of where she was, but it raised countless new questions. How did she get into the water tank? Why was she naked? How did she access the roof? Was she alone? Or did someone help her, or worse, force her into the tank? Was this suicide, an accident, or murder? The next step in seeking answers would be the autopsy. The autopsy. More questions than answers. On February 21, 2013, 2 days after the discovery of Elisa Lam's body, the Los Angeles County Coroner's Office performed an autopsy. The task of determining how Elisa died and what had happened to her fell to the medical examiners and pathologists who would examine her remains. However, the condition of the body after 19 days submerged in water would make their job significantly more difficult. The initial autopsy report described Elisa's body as moderately decomposed and bloated. The skin had a mostly greenish coloration, which is typical of a body that has been in water for an extended period. There was marbling evident on the abdomen, which refers to a discoloration pattern caused by the breakdown of blood vessels and tissues during decomposition. There was also skin separation, meaning the outer layers of skin were sloughing off, another common feature of bodies that have been submerged. The medical examiners found no evidence of physical trauma to the body. There were no signs of blunt force injury, no wounds, no broken bones, and no injuries consistent with a physical assault. This finding was significant because it ruled out the possibility that Elisa had been beaten or attacked in a way that left visible marks on her body. Crucially, there was also no evidence of sexual assault. Given the vulnerable position Elisa would have been in if someone had attacked her, and given that her body was found naked, the absence of sexual assault evidence was an important finding. It suggested that whatever happened to Elisa, it did not involve the kind of predatory sexual violence that might have been feared given the circumstances. The examination also found no evidence that would indicate suicide. There were no self-inflicted wounds, no signs that she had attempted to harm herself before entering the water. Of course, drowning itself can be a method of suicide, but typically there would be other indicators, such as personal effects left behind, a note, or witnesses who saw someone preparing to take their own life. None of these were present in Elisa's case. However, there was one finding that raised questions and would fuel some conspiracy theories. The autopsy noted subcutaneous pooling of blood in Elisa's anal area. Some observers interpreted this as a potential sign of sexual abuse. However, pathologists consulted on the case explained that this pooling could also result from the normal process of decomposition, particularly the bloating that occurs when a body is submerged in water. Additionally, Elisa's rectum was prolapsed, which again can occur during the decomposition process. Without other evidence of sexual assault, the medical examiners did not conclude that this finding indicated abuse. The toxicology report was perhaps the most revealing part of the autopsy. Toxicology tests screen for various substances in the body, including alcohol, prescription medications, and illegal drugs. The results showed that Elisa had no alcohol in her system beyond a very small amount, approximately 0.02 grams %, which is essentially negligible and could even be produced by the decomposition process itself rather than from actual alcohol consumption. More significantly, there were no illegal drugs detected in her system at all. No marijuana, no cocaine, no methamphetamine, no ecstasy, no hallucinogens. None of the substances that some people had speculated might explain her behavior in the elevator video were present in her body. What the toxicology tests did find were traces of her prescription medications, Wellbutrin, Lamictal, Seroquel, and Effexor. However, the levels of these medications in her system were much lower than they should have been if she had been taking them as prescribed. Additionally, non-prescription medications were detected, including Sinutab, which is an over-the-counter cold and allergy medication, and ibuprofen, a common pain reliever. Dr. Jason Tovar, a pathologist for the LA County Coroner's Office who was involved in the case, stated that based on the low levels of prescription medications in Elisa's blood and the quantity of pills remaining in her medication bottles found in her hotel room, it appeared that she had been undertaking her medications, or possibly had recently stopped taking them altogether. Her family had previously informed investigators that Elisa had a history of discontinuing her bipolar medications, which had led to severe episodes in the past. This finding was crucial. For someone with bipolar disorder, particularly bipolar 1, which Elisa had been diagnosed with, not taking medication as prescribed can trigger manic or psychotic episodes. During these episodes, individuals can experience hallucinations, delusions, extreme energy, impulsivity, and dangerously poor judgment. They may believe people are following them, hear voices, or see things that are not there. They may engage in risky behaviors that they would never consider when stable. The autopsy concluded that Elisa Lam died of accidental drowning. The The cause of death was listed as accidental due to drowning, with bipolar disorder listed as a significant condition contributing to her death. This conclusion meant that the medical examiners believed Elisa had entered the water tank on her own, that she had drowned while in the tank, and that her mental health condition had played a role in the circumstances that led to her being in the tank in the first place. However, this conclusion did not satisfy everyone. The autopsy had answered the question of what killed Elisa, but it had not answered how she ended up in the water tank. It had not explained why she was naked, how she accessed the roof, how she climbed into the tank, or what her mental state was in her final moments. The coroner's ruling of accidental death was based on the available physical evidence, but it left many unanswered questions about the sequence of events. The full coroner's report was not immediately released to the public. It would not be made available until June 2013, 5 months after Elisa's death. This delay fueled additional speculation and conspiracy theories. What was in the report that they were not releasing? Was there information being withheld? In reality, toxicology reports and full autopsies often take several months to complete, as testing is time-consuming and thorough. The delay was not unusual for a complex case. When the full report was finally released in June, it provided additional details. It confirmed that Elisa's clothing, watch, and room key had been found in the water with her. The clothing was coated with a sand-like particulate, likely sediment from the bottom of the tank. The report reiterated that there was no evidence of physical trauma, sexual assault, or suicide. The coroner's pathologists noted in their report that they were somewhat ambivalent about ruling the death accidental. The circumstances were unusual enough that they could not completely rule out other possibilities. However, based on the physical evidence available to them, accidental drowning was the most consistent explanation. They could not find evidence of foul play, and they could not definitively prove suicide. That left accident as the most likely conclusion. Detective Wallace Tennell, one of the LAPD investigators who worked on the case, would later give a deposition as part of a lawsuit filed by Elisa's parents against the hotel. In that deposition, he shared his opinion about what happened. "My opinion is that she fell off her medication, and in her state, she happened to find her way onto the roof, got into the tank of water. It's not unusual for people to strip themselves of their clothing and die on their own." He added, "My partner and I tried to figure out how somebody could have put her in there, and it's difficult for someone to have been able to do that and not leave prints, not leave DNA or anything like that." This statement suggested that the investigators had seriously considered the possibility that someone else had been involved in Elisa's death, but could not find evidence to support that theory. If someone had forced Elisa into the water tank, or even just assisted her in climbing in, they would have expected to find fingerprints, DNA, or other forensic evidence of that second person. None was found. Dr. Judy Ho, a clinical and forensic neuropsychologist who was interviewed for the Netflix documentary about the case years later, offered her professional assessment. She stated that based on the evidence, it appeared Elisa had bipolar 1, the more severe form of bipolar disorder. During a manic or psychotic episode associated with this condition, an individual could experience severe hallucinations and delusions. If Elisa believed someone was chasing her, if she felt pursued by an imaginary threat, she might have sought a place to hide. The water tank, from her altered perspective, might have seemed like a safe refuge, a place where whoever she believed was following her could not find her. This explanation aligned with what Elisa's sister had told detectives about previous episodes where Elisa had experienced paranoid delusions. During at least one past episode, Elisa had hidden under her bed, believing people were coming to harm her. The water tank could have served the same function in her mind, a hiding spot from a threat that existed only in her compromised mental state. The autopsy and investigation had provided answers, but they were unsatisfying answers for many people. They explained the medical cause of death, but left the deeper questions of how and why, largely in the realm of inference and educated speculation. This ambiguity would ensure that the case continued to generate theories, discussion, and debate for years to come. The question of access. How did she get there? One of the most perplexing aspects of the Elisa Lam case is the question of how she accessed the water tank in which her body was found. The logistics of reaching the tank and entering it present significant challenges, leading many to question whether she could have done so on her own, or whether someone must have helped her or forced her into the tank. The 4 water tanks were located on the roof of the Cecil Hotel. To reach the roof, one would need to go to the 15th floor, which was the highest floor accessible by the building's elevators and the top floor of guest rooms. From the 15th floor, there was a staircase that led up to the roof. However, this staircase had a door at the top that was locked and equipped with an alarm. According to hotel staff, the door to the roof had an alarm system that would activate if the door was opened by someone who did not have proper authorization or did not deactivate the alarm first. When the alarm sounded, it would be audible to the front desk staff as well as to anyone on the 14th and 15th floors. The alarm was meant to alert staff to unauthorized roof access, as the roof area was restricted to hotel employees only. Santiago Lopez, the maintenance worker who found Elisa's body, testified in court documents that to access the roof that day, he had to turn off the alarm before opening the door. He stated that he did not notice anything wrong with the alarm system and had not heard it go off at any point during Elisa's stay at the hotel. Other hotel employees also stated that they had not heard the alarm activate during the relevant time period. This raises an important question. If the alarm was functioning properly and no one heard it go off, how did Elisa access the roof? There are several possible explanations, none of them entirely satisfying. First, it is possible that Elisa somehow knew how to deactivate the alarm, or that she was able to pass through the door in a way that did not trigger it. However, there is no evidence she had this knowledge, and hotel staff testified that the system required specific knowledge to bypass. Second, it is possible that despite what hotel staff believed, the alarm was not functioning properly at the time Elisa accessed the roof. The Cecil Hotel was an old building, and its maintenance systems may not have always worked as intended. An alarm system that fails to activate when a door is opened would explain how Elisa could have reached the roof without anyone noticing. Third, and this is an important detail that emerged in later investigations, there was an alternative route to the roof: the fire escape. The Cecil Hotel, like many older buildings, had exterior fire escapes on the side of the building that allowed access from room windows to the roof. These fire escapes were intended for emergency evacuation, allowing people to escape from their rooms to the outside of the building and then climb to safety. During the initial police investigation, search dogs tracked Elisa's scent to a window on the 5th floor that connected to one of these fire escapes. At that point, the scent trail was lost. This suggests that Elisa may have exited her room through the window, climbed onto the fire escape, and then used it to reach the roof. The fire escape route would have bypassed the alarm door entirely. After Elisa's death, some people tested whether it was possible to access the roof via the fire escape. A video posted online after her death demonstrated that the hotel's roof was indeed easily accessible via this route. People were able to climb the fire escape from the ground level all the way up to the roof without triggering any alarms or encountering any significant obstacles. This test suggested that Elisa could have used this method to reach the roof. However, using the fire escape would have required Elisa to open her window, climb out onto the exterior of the building, and then scale multiple floors worth of metal stairs and ladders. For someone experiencing a psychotic episode, this would be a dangerous undertaking, but not impossible, especially if she believed she was fleeing from someone or something. Once on the roof, Elisa would have faced additional challenges. The 4 water tanks were not sitting at ground level. They were propped up on a concrete platform that was elevated from the roof surface. To reach the tanks, she would have needed to climb up onto this platform, which would have required pulling herself up or finding a way to scale the platform's edge. The tanks themselves were approximately 10 feet tall. They were cylindrical structures, 4 feet in diameter and 8 feet in length. To look inside the tank or to enter it, one would need to climb a ladder that was attached to the side of each tank. This ladder was about 10 feet tall, bringing a person to the top of the tank where the access hatch was located. The hatch itself was a heavy metal lid. Different sources provide varying estimates of its weight, with some saying approximately 20 pounds. While not impossibly heavy, it would require some effort to move, especially while standing on a ladder at the top of a 10-foot tank. Moreover, the hatch would need to be pushed aside or lifted to gain access to the interior of the tank. Could Elisa Lam have done all of this by herself? Physically, it seems possible. She was a young, relatively healthy woman. While climbing the platform, ascending the ladder, and opening the hatch would have required effort, none of these tasks would have been beyond the physical capabilities of an average adult. The question is whether someone in a psychotic state, potentially disoriented and frightened, would have been able to successfully navigate all of these obstacles. Once the hatch was open, entering the tank would have required either carefully climbing in or simply falling in. The tank was approximately 3/4 full of water at the time Elisa's body was discovered, meaning the water level was several feet below the opening. Entering the tank would have been a drop of several feet before hitting the water. This brings us to another mystery. Why was Elisa naked? Her clothing, watch, and room key were found in the tank with her, but she was not wearing them. Several theories have been proposed. One theory is that Elisa removed her clothing before entering the tank, though why she would do so is unclear. It is possible that during a psychotic episode, the act of removing clothing seemed logical to her, for reasons that only made sense in her altered mental state. Another theory is that she entered the tank clothed but removed her clothing after being in the water, perhaps because the weight of wet clothing made it difficult to stay afloat, or because hypothermia was setting in. People suffering from severe hypothermia sometimes engage in paradoxical undressing, where they remove their clothing despite being dangerously cold, due to confusion and impaired judgment caused by the hypothermia. A third, darker theory is that someone else removed her clothing either before or after she entered the tank. However, this theory is complicated by the absence of any physical evidence of another person being involved, and by the fact that if someone had removed her clothing, it is unclear why they would have placed the clothes in the tank with her, rather than disposing of them elsewhere. The question of the hatch lid's position when the body was discovered has also been a point of controversy. Some initial reports stated that the hatch was closed when investigators arrived at the scene, which raised the question of how Elisa could have closed it from inside the tank. However, Santiago Lopez, the maintenance worker who discovered the body, stated clearly in his testimony that the hatch was open when he looked inside the tank. He said he closed the hatch after seeing the body and before reporting his discovery to authorities. This testimony resolves one of the supposed mysteries of the case, though it did not become widely known until later. Additional questions surround the search dog's failure to detect Elisa's body during the initial police search. Police dogs had been on the roof during the search for the missing woman. Why did they not alert to the water tank where her body was located? The answer likely lies in how scent detection works. Cadaver dogs are trained to detect the scent of decomposition, but those scent molecules need to be able to reach the dog's nose. A body sealed inside a closed water tank filled with water would produce scent molecules that would be largely trapped inside the tank. The heavy metal lid and the water itself would act as barriers preventing the scent from escaping in sufficient quantities for the dogs to detect. This is not a failure of the dogs or their handlers, but rather a limitation of the technology when the source of the scent is sealed in an environment like a water tank. Tim Marcia, an LAPD homicide detective assigned to the case, would later state in interviews that investigators had information not shared with the public regarding the severity of Elisa's mental health history. This statement suggests that the police, in consultation with medical professionals and based on information from Elisa's family, concluded that her mental state at the time made it plausible that she could have accessed the roof, climbed into the tank, and drowned accidentally during a psychotic episode. Some people find this explanation compelling and believe it accounts for the known facts. Others remain skeptical, arguing that the sequence of events required for Elisa to access the tank on her own seems too difficult and unlikely. They point to the multiple obstacles she would have had to overcome, the physical effort required, and the question of why someone in a psychotic state would specifically choose a water tank as a hiding place. The truth is that we may never know with absolute certainty exactly how Elisa accessed the water tank. The forensic evidence supports the conclusion that she was alone when she entered it, but the absence of evidence is not quite the same as evidence of absence. What we do know is that people experiencing severe psychotic episodes can engage in behaviors that seem impossible or illogical to observers. They can muster physical strength and determination in pursuit of what they perceive as safety or escape from a threat that exists only in their altered perception of reality. The most likely explanation, based on the available evidence, is that Elisa was not taking her medication as prescribed, experienced a severe psychotic episode, believed she was being pursued or threatened, used the fire escape to access the roof in an attempt to escape or hide, and climbed into the water tank seeking refuge. Once in the tank, whether through exhaustion, hypothermia, or simply being unable to climb back out, she drowned. It is a heartbreaking scenario, a tragic outcome of an illness that had plagued her for years, striking at the worst possible moment when she was alone and far from home. Conspiracy theories and internet investigation. When speculation becomes dangerous. The Elisa Lam case became a phenomenon in the relatively new world of internet-based true crime investigation. The case emerged at a time when social media platforms, video sharing sites, and forums like Reddit were becoming central to how people consumed and discussed news. The elevator video, in particular, was perfect for viral spread. It was short, visually striking, deeply strange, and open to interpretation. It raised questions that seemed to demand answers, and the internet was more than happy to provide them, whether those answers were grounded in fact or not. As the video spread across the internet, accumulating millions of views, amateur investigators began combing through every detail of the case. YouTube channels dedicated to true crime, paranormal phenomena, and unsolved mysteries created content analyzing the footage frame by frame. Reddit forums hosted long discussions where users shared theories and searched for clues. Tumblr blogs dedicated to the case sprung up, collecting information and speculation. Chinese social media platforms saw similar discussions. The case had become a global obsession. Some of the theories that emerged were relatively grounded in possible reality, while others ventured into the realm of the bizarre and supernatural. Examining these theories reveals both the power and the danger of internet-based investigation. One of the most discussed theories involved connections between Elisa's death and the 2005 horror film Dark Water, which was itself a remake of a 2002 Japanese film of the same name. Both films were based on a short story by Koji Suzuki called Floating Water. The plot of these films is remarkably similar to what happened to Elisa Lam. In Dark Water, a mother named Dahlia and her young daughter Cecilia move into a rundown apartment building. they experience strange events involving water, including a leak in their ceiling. The building has a dysfunctional elevator that plays a role in the story. Eventually, it is revealed that a young girl named Natasha had drowned in the building's rooftop water tank after being abandoned by her parents. Her body in the water tank was causing the problems with the water in the building, and her ghost was haunting the place. The parallels to the Elisa Lam case are striking. Both involve a young woman found dead in a rooftop water tank. In both cases, the discovery is prompted by residents complaining about water problems, including low pressure and discolored water with an unusual taste. Both stories feature an elevator playing a prominent role. In the movie, the elevator appears to malfunction. In Elisa's case, the viral elevator video showed the elevator not functioning normally. Even small details seem to align. In the 2005 American version of Dark Water, the young ghost girl is depicted wearing a red jacket, similar to the red hoodie Elisa was wearing in the elevator footage. The daughter in the movie is named Cecilia, which is phonetically similar to Cecil, the name of the hotel. The movie's atmosphere of a deteriorating building populated by desperate people matched the reality of the Cecil Hotel's condition and clientele. These similarities led some theorists to propose that Elisa's death was not an accident, but rather a deliberate murder designed to replicate the plot of the movie. Some suggested that someone was using Elisa to act out the movie's events, possibly as some sort of twisted artistic statement or ritualistic killing. Others wondered if Elisa herself had seen the movie and, during a psychotic episode, was somehow acting out scenes from it, confusing fiction with reality. The problem with these theories is that they require either accepting that a murderer went to elaborate lengths to kill someone in a very specific way to match a movie, or that Elisa's psychotic break just happened to manifest in behaviors that perfectly aligned with a film she may or may not have ever seen. While coincidences can be striking and unsettling, they are ultimately just coincidences. The films came out years before Elisa's death, and water tanks on top of buildings are not particularly unique features. Another theory that gained traction involved a tuberculosis outbreak that occurred in the Skid Row area near the Cecil Hotel around the time of Elisa's death. This detail, on its own, might not have seemed significant. However, internet investigators discovered that the tuberculosis test being used was called the Lam-Elisa test, which stands for lipoarabinomannan, LAM, enzyme-linked immunosorbent assay, ELISA. These initials match Elisa Lam's name almost exactly. This coincidence led to wild speculation. Some theorists proposed that Elisa was being used as a biological weapon to spread tuberculosis to the homeless population in Skid Row. Others suggested she was involved in tuberculosis research and had been killed to cover up something she had discovered. Some noted that the University of British Columbia, where Elisa was a student, has a notable tuberculosis research center, suggesting she might have had connections to TB research. These theories required believing in elaborate conspiracies involving public health officials, researchers, and murderers working in concert. There is absolutely no evidence connecting Elisa to tuberculosis research, to any biological warfare program, or to any conspiracy. The name of the test is a coincidence, nothing more. Lam-Elisa tests have been used for years in TB diagnosis, and their name has nothing to do with any individual named Elisa Lam. The tuberculosis outbreak in Skid Row was a real public health concern, but it had no connection to Elisa's death beyond tragic timing and proximity. Perhaps the most harmful conspiracy theory to emerge from the case involved false accusations against a specific individual. Pablo Vergara, a musician and artist who performs under the stage name Morbid, was staying at the Cecil Hotel in February 2013, around the same time as Elisa. When amateur internet investigators discovered this fact, some immediately suspected him of being involved in Elisa's death. Vergara's appearance, He has tattoos and an aesthetic associated with goth and metal subcultures. His stage name and his presence at the hotel were deemed suspicious by some online sleuths. They scrutinized his social media posts, his music, and his movements, looking for any connection to Elisa. Despite there being absolutely no evidence linking him to her disappearance, he was accused online of being responsible for her death. The accusations spread across social media platforms and were repeated in forums and videos. The impact on Vergara was devastating. In a 2021 interview with Entertainment Tonight, he described how the false accusations had affected his life. He received death threats, his career suffered, he experienced anxiety and depression. The online mob's conviction that he was somehow involved in Elisa's death, based on nothing but his presence at the hotel and his appearance, led to years of harassment. He stated that he is still scarred by the experience, and that the false accusations contributed to a suicide attempt. This case demonstrates the very real danger of internet investigation and trial by social media. Vergara was completely innocent, but the armchair detectives who accused him did not need proof, only suspicion. Their actions had real consequences for a real person's life. In 2021, when the Netflix documentary about the case was released, Vergara was contacted again, forcing him to relive the trauma of being falsely accused. Other theories ventured into the supernatural and paranormal. Some people believed that the Cecil Hotel was haunted or cursed, given its long history of death and tragedy. They interpreted Elisa's behavior in the elevator as evidence that she was interacting with a ghost or demon. The hand gestures she made were described as conjuring spirits or communicating with the dead. Some theories proposed that she was possessed or under the influence of malevolent supernatural forces. A particularly unusual theory involved the Korean elevator game, a supposed ritual that originated in South Korea. According to the legend, if you press elevator buttons in a specific sequence while alone in an elevator in a building with 10 or more floors, you can transport yourself to another dimension or encounter a supernatural entity. The instructions for the game involve pressing multiple buttons, and on the 5th floor, an invisible woman is supposed to enter the elevator. The game's instructions seem to match some of Elisa's actions in the video, leading some to theorize that she was playing this game, either deliberately or unknowingly. Of course, there is no evidence that the Korean elevator game is anything more than an urban legend, and there is no way to travel to another dimension by pressing elevator buttons. Even if Elisa knew about this legend, it is far more likely that her button pressing was the result of confusion, an attempt to make the elevator work, or symptom of her psychotic episode, rather than a deliberate attempt to play a supernatural game. The video editing theories also persisted, with some investigators convinced that the police or the hotel had manipulated the footage to hide evidence of another person's involvement. These theories were based on perceived anomalies in the video, the scrambled timestamp, and what some believed were signs of editing. However, as discussed earlier, more mundane explanations exist for these features, related to the nature of security camera footage and standard police procedures. What all these conspiracy theories have in common is that they refuse to accept the simplest and most evidence-supported explanation, that Elisa Lam was suffering from a severe mental health crisis, stopped taking her medication, experienced a psychotic episode, and died in a tragic accident. This explanation, while sad and somewhat unsatisfying because it does not involve a villain to blame or a mystery to solve, is consistent with everything known about the case. The Internet's investigation of the Elisa Lam case demonstrates a phenomenon that has become increasingly common in the age of social media: apophenia, the tendency to perceive meaningful connections between unrelated things. When millions of people are looking for patterns, examining every detail and sharing their findings, coincidences get magnified and given undue significance. The Lam-Elisa test, the dark water connections, the timestamp on the video, the position of her hands, the Korean elevator game. None of these things actually connect to what happened to Elisa in any meaningful way, but they feel like they should mean something, so people convince themselves they did. This case became a cautionary tale about the limits and dangers of internet investigation. While crowdsourced research can sometimes uncover important information and generate leads in cold cases, it can also lead to misinformation, harassment of innocent people, and the spread of conspiracy theories that obscure rather than illuminate the truth. The internet wanted Elisa Lam's death to be a mystery, to be something more than a mental health tragedy, because mysteries are compelling and tragedies are just sad. But sometimes the truth is sad, and accepting that is more respectful to the victim and her family than spinning elaborate theories that serve more to entertain the living than to understand what actually happened to the dead. The legal aftermath and family's pursuit of justice. In September 2013, several months after Elisa's body was discovered and her death was ruled accidental, her parents, David and Elisa Lam, filed a wrongful death lawsuit against the Cecil Hotel. The lawsuit was filed in Los Angeles Superior Court against Cecil Hotel Management, Inc. The Lams sought unspecified damages as well as compensation for their daughter's burial costs. The basis of the lawsuit was that the hotel operators had an obligation to maintain the premises in a safe condition and to inspect and seek out hazards in the hotel that presented an unreasonable risk of danger to Lam and other hotel guests. The Lamb's attorney, Thomas Johnston, argued that the water tank should have been secured in a way that would have prevented access. He stated, "They should have secured that water tank. This was an accident waiting to happen." The lawsuit claimed that if the hotel had properly secured the water tanks with locks or other safety measures, Elisa would not have been able to access them, and her death could have been prevented. The Lambs argued that it was reasonably foreseeable that a guest with mental health issues might access areas of the hotel that should have been off-limits, and that the hotel had a duty to prevent such access. The Cecil Hotel's attorneys filed a motion to dismiss the lawsuit. Their defense rested on several arguments. First, they contended that the hotel could not have reasonably foreseen that Elisa would access the water tank. The roof was supposed to be restricted to hotel staff with a locked and alarmed door preventing unauthorized access. The water tanks themselves were difficult to reach, requiring climbing onto a platform and then up a ladder. The hotel argued that they had taken reasonable security measures and that Elisa's access to the tank was not something they could have predicted or prevented. Second, the hotel's lawyers pointed out that it was still not entirely clear how Elisa had accessed the roof and the water tank. If the means of access remained a mystery even after the investigation, how could the hotel be held liable for failing to prevent something that no one fully understood? They argued that since it remained unknown how Lam was able to get into the water tank, no liability could possibly be assigned for failing to prevent it. The hotel's defense was essentially that Elisa's death occurred in an area where guests were not permitted through means that could not be entirely explained and in circumstances that were so unusual that they could not be reasonably foreseen. They argued that while the death was tragic, it was not the result of negligence on the hotel's part. The case was assigned to Los Angeles Superior Court Judge Howard Halm. In his consideration of the motion to dismiss, Judge Halm examined the facts of the case and the legal standards for premises liability. For the hotel to be held liable, it would need to be shown that they had breached a duty of care owed to Elisa, and that this breach directly caused her death. In December 2015, Judge Halm issued his ruling. He granted the hotel's motion to dismiss the lawsuit. In his 9-page decision, Judge Halm concluded that Elisa Lam's death was unforeseeable because it occurred in an area of the hotel where guests were not allowed to be. He wrote that to reach the water tank, Lam would have had to go to the hotel roof, climb onto a platform, scale a 10-foot ladder along the side of the tank, push aside the 20-pound lid, and then either fall or climb into the tank. Judge Halm noted that the hotel management knew of no previous incidents of guests accessing the water tanks. He wrote, "In fact, the very nature of the water tank would make it unreasonable for Lam to assume that she was allowed to climb it and open the lid." The judge's ruling essentially held that the sequence of events required for Elisa to end up in the water tank was so unusual and unprecedented that the hotel could not be expected to have anticipated and prevented it. The Lamb's attorney, Thomas Johnston, indicated after the hearing that he would need to consider the issues further before deciding whether to appeal the ruling. However, there is no public record of an appeal being filed. The lawsuit was dismissed, and the hotel was not held legally liable for Elisa's death. This outcome was deeply disappointing for the Lam family. They had lost their daughter in tragic and disturbing circumstances, and they were unable to hold the hotel accountable in court. From their perspective, their daughter had been vulnerable due to her mental illness, and the hotel had failed to protect her. The fact that she was able to access the roof and the water tank suggested to them that the hotel's security measures were inadequate. However, from a legal standpoint, Judge Halm's ruling was consistent with premises liability law. Property owners are generally required to maintain safe conditions and to address hazards that they know about or should reasonably know about. But they are not typically held liable for highly unusual circumstances that could not be reasonably anticipated. The specific combination of factors that led to Elisa's death, her mental health crisis, her access to the roof via the fire escape, her decision to climb into the water tank, was so outside the realm of normal events that the court concluded the hotel could not be expected to have prevented it. In addition to the wrongful death suit filed by Elisa's parents, other guests at the Cecil Hotel filed lawsuits against the establishment. Some guests who had stayed at the hotel during the period when Elisa's body was in the water tank filed suit, claiming emotional distress and health concerns from having bathed in, brushed their teeth with, and consumed water that had contained a decomposing body. The media referred to this as the corpse water lawsuit. These guests argued that they had suffered psychological trauma from knowing they had been exposed to this contaminated water. Some reported symptoms of illness that they attributed to the water. The hotel responded that health officials had tested the water and determined it did not pose significant health risks, and that any illness was more likely psychosomatic than caused by actual contamination. The outcomes of these lawsuits are not widely publicized, and it is unclear whether any settlements were reached. The legal proceedings highlighted the limits of the justice system in providing closure or accountability in cases like this. While the Lam family's desire to hold someone responsible for their daughter's death was understandable, the legal standard for premises liability did not support their claims. The hotel had not been found negligent in any criminal sense, and the civil courts determined they had not been negligent in a way that made them liable for damages. For David and Elisa Lam, the dismissal of their lawsuit meant that there would be no official finding of fault, no financial compensation, and no vindication of their belief that their daughter's death could and should have been prevented. They have largely stayed out of the public eye since the case concluded. They returned to Vancouver, to their restaurant, to their life that now had a Elisa-shaped hole in it. They have not given extensive interviews or made public statements about the case in recent years. Their grief is private, as it should be. The legal aftermath of the case was just one aspect of how it continued to resonate long after Elisa's body was found. The case had captured public imagination to such a degree that it became part of popular culture, inspiring TV shows, movies, music, and continued discussion online. The Cecil Hotel itself had become more famous than ever, though not in a way that helped its reputation or its business. Cultural impact: how Elisa Lam's story became legend. The story of Elisa Lam's disappearance and death at the Cecil Hotel had an impact that extended far beyond the immediate facts of the case. It became a cultural touchstone, a story that was referenced, adapted, and reinterpreted in various media. It influenced how people thought about true crime, internet investigation, mental health, and the line between mystery and tragedy. One of the most prominent examples of the case's cultural impact was its influence on Ryan Murphy's American Horror Story anthology series. The show's fifth season, American Horror Story Hotel, which aired in 2015, was partially inspired by the Cecil Hotel and the Elisa Lam case. Murphy confirmed in interviews that the surveillance footage of Elisa in the elevator had sparked his interest in creating a season set in a hotel with a dark history. There was a surveillance video that went around 2 years ago that showed a girl getting into an elevator in a hotel that was said to be haunted, Murphy told Entertainment Weekly in 2015, and she was never seen again. While AHS Hotel was not a direct retelling of Elisa's story, the show's hotel setting, the references to a building with a violent past, and the overall atmosphere were clearly influenced by the Cecil Hotel and its most famous recent tragedy. Other television shows also incorporated elements of the case. The ABC series Castle, which featured a mystery novelist working with police to solve crimes, aired an episode titled Watershed in May 2013, just months after Elisa's death. In the episode, the characters investigate the death of a young woman found in the rooftop water tank of a hotel called the Cecil Hotel. The episode includes surveillance footage of the woman in an elevator. While the show's producers did not confirm it was directly based on the Elisa Lam case, the similarities are unmistakable. How to Get Away with Murder, another ABC series, featured a storyline in its first season involving a college student who goes missing and is eventually discovered to have been murdered, with her body hidden in a water tank on the roof of a sorority house. The plot unfolds through flashbacks, revealing the circumstances of her death. Again, while not a direct adaptation, the core element of a body in a rooftop water tank clearly echoes the Elisa Lam case. In Hong Kong, where Elisa's family had originated, filmmaker Nick Cheung made his directorial debut with Hungry Ghost Ritual, a horror thriller released in 2014. The film includes a scene in which a ghost terrorizes a young woman in an MOTATN elevator, shot to resemble security camera footage similar to the viral video of Elisa. The connection to the case was obvious to audiences familiar with the story. In mainland China, director Liu Hao announced his intention to make a film directly based on Elisa's death. He traveled to Los Angeles and stayed at the Cecil Hotel himself to conduct research. Chinese media reported that actress Gao Yuanyuan might be interested in playing Elisa. The film would explore the mystery and tragedy of what happened to the young woman, bringing her story to Chinese audiences who had followed the case closely. Other filmmakers also saw dramatic potential in the story. In March 2014, brothers Brandon and Philip Murphy sold a horror film script titled The Bringing that used the investigation into Elisa's death as a backstory for a fictional detective who slowly loses his sanity while working the case. The script was sold to Sony Pictures, with Danish director Nicholas Winding Refn initially attached to direct, though the project underwent several changes. The Murphy brothers faced criticism for commercializing Elisa's death so soon after it occurred, with some accusing them of being disrespectful to her memory and her family's grief. The music world also responded to the case. In 2018, the industrial rock band Squeend released a single titled Elisa Lam. The music video for the song recreated scenes from the elevator footage, with a woman portraying Elisa going through the same strange movements and gestures. The song told the story of her death and the mystery surrounding it. While some fans appreciated the artistic tribute, Others felt it was exploitative to turn a real person's death into entertainment. The indie rock band Sun Kill Moon, led by Mark Kozelek, included a song titled "Richard Ramirez Died Today of Natural Causes" on their 2014 album. While primarily about the Night Stalker, the song also references Elisa Lam and the Cecil Hotel. In interviews, Kozelek expressed skepticism about the official story of Elisa's death, stating, "I've come to the conclusion that nobody died in the water tank. There's no way to identify the girl on the elevator, as her face is pixelated." This statement reflects the conspiracy theories that persisted around the case, though his conclusion contradicts the established facts. Video games also incorporated elements of the story. YIIK, a postmodern RPG released in 2019, features a character named Semi Pak, who disappears in circumstances very similar to those of Elisa Lam, including elevator footage and eventual discovery in a mysterious location. The game's developers faced significant backlash for this inclusion, with many critics and players arguing that it was in poor taste to use a real person's death, barely disguised, as a plot device in a video game. The criticism was severe enough that the developers eventually acknowledged the controversy and expressed regret for how they had handled the subject matter. Perhaps the most significant media treatment of the case came in 2021, when Netflix released a 4-part documentary series titled "Crime Scene: The Vanishing at the Cecil Hotel." Directed by Joe Berlinger, the series explored not just Elisa's death, but also the long, dark history of the Cecil Hotel itself, the surrounding Skid Row neighborhood, and the internet's obsession with the case. The documentary featured interviews with hotel staff, including manager Amy Price and maintenance worker Santiago Lopez. It included commentary from LAPD detectives who worked the case, from the coroner's office pathologist, and from web sleuths who had become obsessed with solving the mystery. The series also dedicated significant attention to the harm caused by internet investigation, featuring Pablo Vergara discussing how false accusations had affected his life. The Netflix series was both praised and criticized. Some viewers appreciated its thorough examination of the case and its honest discussion of how internet speculation had caused real harm. Others felt that the series itself was exploitative, that it spent 4 episodes building up conspiracy theories only to debunk them in the final episode, and that it treated Elisa's death as entertainment rather than as a human tragedy. The debate over the documentary reflected larger questions about true crime media. How do we tell these stories respectfully? At what point does interest in a case become voyeurism? How do we balance public interest with respect for the deceased and their families? Beyond these explicit adaptations and references, the Elisa Lam case had a broader impact on true crime culture. It became one of the defining cases of internet-era crime investigation, a case study in how viral content can shape public perception of events. It demonstrated both the power of crowdsourced investigation, millions of people examining evidence and sharing information, and the significant dangers, including misinformation, conspiracy theories, and harassment of innocent people. The case also contributed to ongoing conversations about mental health, particularly about bipolar disorder and the importance of medication compliance. Mental health advocates and experts used Elisa's story to educate people about the reality of serious mental illness, pushing back against sensational interpretations of her death and emphasizing the medical factors involved. For many young people, especially young women, Elisa's story was deeply personal. They saw themselves in her, someone traveling alone, trying to be independent, dealing with mental health challenges, and ultimately meeting a tragic end. Her story became a cautionary tale in various ways, about the importance of mental health treatment, about the dangers of solo travel, about the vulnerability of young women in unfamiliar places. Some of these interpretations are helpful, others perhaps unfairly burden young women with fear and restriction. The Cecil Hotel itself, became even more notorious after Elisa's death. The hotel had long been known for its dark history, but Elisa's case brought it international attention. However, this attention did not translate into success for the business. The hotel closed in 2017 for renovations, with plans to rebrand and reopen. In February 2017, the Los Angeles City Council designated the Cecil Hotel as a historic cultural monument, recognizing its architectural significance and its place in the city's history, for better or worse. The renovation work was supposed to be completed by 2021, but the COVID-19 pandemic disrupted those plans. The hotel sat empty and closed for years. In December 2021, the building was re-inaugurated as affordable housing, no longer operating as a hotel at all. The new incarnation was meant to provide housing for low-income residents, including formerly homeless individuals. However, reports from 2023 indicated that conditions inside the former Cecil Hotel had deteriorated significantly. A Los Angeles Times article described black mold, vermin infestations, water leaks, graffiti, vandalism, and unsanitary communal areas. Residents, many of whom required ongoing medical, mental health, and substance abuse treatment, were living in difficult conditions. In 2024, the owners, Simon Barron Properties, listed the building for sale. The Cecil Hotel's story, in many ways, reflects the broader failures of urban policy, mental health care, and support for vulnerable populations. The building that was once meant to be grand has spent a century bearing witness to human suffering, from the victims of the Great Depression to the homeless population of Skid Row, to individuals like Elisa Lam, whose lives were claimed by circumstances beyond their control. The building itself is not cursed, but the conditions that create the suffering within its walls, poverty, addiction, mental illness, violence, are systemic problems that society has failed to adequately address. Conclusion: a tragedy, not a mystery. After examining all the available evidence, all the theories, all the speculation and investigation, what can we conclude about what happened to Elisa Lam? The most likely explanation, the one supported by the physical evidence and the expert analysis, is this. Elisa Lam was a young woman with bipolar disorder who was not consistently taking her prescribed medication. While traveling alone in Los Angeles and staying at the Cecil Hotel, she experienced a severe psychotic episode. During this episode, she believed she was being pursued or threatened. Her behavior in the elevator, the button pressing, the hiding, the apparent interaction with someone unseen, was the result of hallucinations and delusions caused by her untreated mental illness. At some point, seeking to escape her perceived pursuers, Elisa made her way to the roof of the hotel, likely via the fire escape that bypassed the alarmed door. On the roof, she found the water tanks. In her compromised mental state, the water tank may have appeared to be a hiding place, a refuge where she could be safe from the threats that existed only in her mind. She climbed the platform, ascended the ladder, opened the hatch, and entered the water tank. Once inside, whether due to exhaustion, hypothermia, the effects of her untreated illness, or simply the physical impossibility of climbing back out of the tank, she was unable to exit. She drowned in the water. It was an accidental death, but one that was made possible by her mental illness and her lack of proper medication at the time. This explanation is sad. It is tragic. It highlights the terrible consequences that can result when someone with a serious mental illness does not receive the treatment they need. It underscores the vulnerability of people traveling alone, especially when experiencing a medical or psychiatric emergency. It reminds us of how quickly things can go wrong and how a person's life can end in circumstances that seem impossible to comprehend. This explanation does not involve a murder. It does not involve a conspiracy. It does not involve ghosts or curses or rituals or cover-ups. It is not the kind of mystery that invites endless speculation and investigation. And perhaps that is why so many people have resisted accepting it. A tragic accident resulting from mental illness is not as compelling, not as interesting, not as entertaining as a murder mystery or a supernatural occurrence. But it is what the evidence supports. Elisa Lam was not the victim of a killer. She was the victim of an illness, one that is still misunderstood and stigmatized, one that too often goes undertreated or untreated. Her death serves as a reminder of the importance of mental health care, of the need for people with bipolar disorder and other serious mental illnesses to have access to treatment, to take their medications, and to have support systems in place, especially when they are away from home. It is also a reminder of the limitations and dangers of internet investigation. The countless hours spent by thousands of people examining every detail of the case, generating theories, and accusing innocent people, did not lead to any new understanding of what happened. Instead, it created noise, spread misinformation, and caused real harm to people like Pablo Vergara, who were falsely accused. The internet wanted there to be a mystery to solve, wanted there to be a villain to unmask, wanted there to be something more than a sad young woman dying alone because her brain was betraying her. But wanting something to be true does not make it true. For David and Elisa Lam, Elisa's parents, the past years since 2013 have been marked by unimaginable grief. They lost their daughter in circumstances that were disturbing and difficult to understand. They have had to watch as her death became a spectacle, as millions of people around the world viewed the footage of her final known moments, as conspiracy theories proliferated, as her story was adapted into entertainment. They have had to navigate their loss while the world treated their daughter's death as a puzzle to be solved rather than as a human tragedy. We do not know how they are doing now. They have maintained their privacy, as they have every right to do. We can only hope that they have found some measure of peace, that they remember Elisa not as the girl in the elevator video, but as their daughter, as the person she was before that terrible day in Los Angeles. We can hope that they have been able to grieve without the intrusion of the internet's endless fascination with what happened to her. Elisa Lam was 21 years old when she died. She was a student, a writer, a young woman with dreams and ambitions. She loved books and fashion and travel. She struggled with her mental health but was trying to live her life anyway. She deserved better than to die alone and afraid in a water tank. She deserved better than to have her death turned into entertainment and conspiracy theories. She deserved the chance to get the help she needed, to find medication and treatment that worked for her, to live a full life. Her death serves as a reminder that we need to do better as a society in how we treat mental illness. We need to reduce the stigma that prevents people from seeking help. We need to ensure that people have access to affordable mental health care. We need to educate people about the importance of medication compliance for conditions like bipolar disorder. We need to create support systems so that people who are struggling are not alone when they need help most. The case also reminds us to approach true crime stories with humanity and respect. These are real people's lives, real families' tragedies. When we consume true crime content, when we discuss these cases online, when we create theories and speculate, we should remember that there are real human beings at the center of these stories. We should strive for empathy and understanding rather than sensationalism and entertainment. The Cecil Hotel stands in downtown Los Angeles, a testament to 100 years of history, much of it dark. The building has been many things, a symbol of 1920s optimism, a witness to the Great Depression, a home for the desperate and forgotten, a temporary residence for some of America's most notorious criminals, and the location of a tragedy that captured the world's attention. Now, it serves as housing for some of Los Angeles's most vulnerable residents, continuing its century-long role as a place where people struggling with the hardships of life find temporary shelter. Elisa Lam checked into that building with hopes and plans. She never checked out. Her story is not a mystery to be solved. It is a tragedy to be mourned and, hopefully, learned from. May she rest in peace, and may her memory serve as a catalyst for greater compassion, better mental health care, and more responsible engagement with true crime stories.